Hello everybody, this is Connor at BoatsDon'tSink, here with another Shadowverse Evolve deck profile. This time we're going to be looking at the Usurpation Sword deck from BP05. This is another one of the Omen decks, so these are the cover characters of BP05 Omens Eternal. We're now on to the 8th Omen, so we've got one more that we're going to cover, since the 1st and 10th are neutrals that are pretty much just generic splashes in any deck, and we'll actually be seeing one of those in here. The 8th Omen is Octrice, the Omen of Usurpation. Her theme is actually pretty cool. They are all thief cards, so we're going to be basically stealing everything from our opponent. As you can see, the Trial of Usurpation will wrest away all possessions, so Octrice's abilities are going to let us basically go through our opponent's cemetery and just take the best cards that we can find. As I said, all of her cards are Thief trait. This is a trait that we've only had one card for previously, that being Alvida's command in set 1. So not a whole lot of like trait synergy going on. Avaricia, the 1-cost spell, does add Thief cards to hand. So it can pretty much only add these Usurpation cards and whatever we get in the future, but all of the others just have synergy mechanically, not as a trait. Octrice herself is going to be the card doing the stealing from our opponent's cemetery. However, all of the others have effects based around putting cards from our opponent's deck into their cemetery, and then either getting bonuses when cards are put into cemetery from our opponent's deck, or getting extra effects based on the number of cards in our opponent's cemetery. Most of them are going to care about our opponent having at least 10 cards in their cemetery, which with these effects we can actually get to pretty quickly. Looking at the deck list, this one's going to be a little different from normal. This list was actually given to me by a friend. It comes from Simu, or Chairman. He's pretty active in the Vice Schwartz community and has been playing Shadowverse Evolve since it came out. This is a list that he used for a showdown challenge, I believe. He ended up with a 5-1 record. Throughout the tournament was able to beat pretty much every other deck in the format. I believe his wins were 1 each against Forest, Dragon, Rune, Abyss, and Haven, with a loss to the Forest in Swiss as his 1 loss. So it's a deck that has actually gone through a tournament, gone through some testing, done pretty well, but still, as usual, make sure to play test it for yourself, make any changes you find necessary. I know that Simo and I play quite differently quite often, so that may very well be the case for you. So the deck here is actually a combination of the previous heroic deck and the usurpation cards, which is you know, not probably the first place I would have gone. I actually think the usurpation cards are quite good in a sort of slower mid-rangey deck where you're getting a lot of value out of them. Octrice being able to steal cards is something that generates a lot of card advantage for you. However, Simu chose instead to use that as a sort of late game engine with the powerful early game that the heroic deck provides. So we're basically, half of our deck is early game cards that are aggro and we're just going to blast our opponent with, and then the other half are really good once our opponent has 10 cards in cemetery and we're trying to close out the game and have really good top decks. You can check out the deck log page for this deck at 6E5J0, or using the link in the description. The Evo deck, since we are playing 2 separate packages that each have a lot of evolved cards, is pretty thin. 2-2-2-2-1-1. A lot of Evos. It does mean that some of our Evos we might run out of throughout the game if we just draw multiple copies of the card. So that is something to consider as maybe a little bit of a downside here, but it also gives us a lot of options of different things to do. The curve itself is incredibly low. Basically, the entire deck costs 3 or less, which is great for heroic entry. and then just 2 cards sort of closer to the top end. Our goal here really is just to end the game as quickly as possible, and by running out as many cards as possible. But some of these cards do have sort of like higher cost evos or ways to spend more play points that are going to make them good into the late game even once we're past 3 play points. Mostly followers, 6 spells, pretty normal for a what you'd see in a sword deck, either for heroic or usurpation, since this is just both of all their cards jammed together. Getting into the details of the cards, our first 1-drop is Ironwrought Defender. So this is the heroic 1-drop. It's a 2/2 goblin stat line, which is great for an aggro deck. It's one of the cards that we just want to play turn 1 and be able to start attacking in for 2. However, if we draw it sort of in the mid game, if there's at least 2 heroic cards in our cemetery when it enters, we're able to give it +1 defense and ward, which is going to be one of our really only ways to have any kind of defensive option in this deck. The 5 heroic cards we play, they are all low cost ish, but we're not really going to have them early game when we're playing Ironwrought Defender. This is more of just something that's going to come up in sort of the mid or late game if you draw this and have to play it as a 1-drop. Next we play 3 copies of Old Man and Old Woman. I know this card gets a lot of hate in the aggro decks because it is a 1/2, which is a pretty bad stat line for aggro decks. However, it has Bane, and it's one of the only like cheap cards we can play with Bane. Which in the past has always been like pretty important for dealing with wards. It's hard to get through things like Ancient Elf with your, 2/2s, 3/3s. When they have like a 5/5 Ancient Elf, you want something that can just clear it immediately. And now that set 5 is out, Marwyn is pretty much the biggest threat that you have to deal with in terms of walling you out. He's an 8/8 with aura and words. We can't even target him with our effects, and we really need a way to get rid of him in order to be able to attack through, and Old Man and Old Woman is one of the best ways we can do that. Since an early game Marwyn means our opponent's going to be skipping their turn to evolve, we can actually just play the Old Man and Old Woman, and then on the extra turn attack with it to clear their Marwyn, and attack with whatever else we can play. Our next 1-drop is Quickblader. This is just a 1-cost 1/1 with Storm. Again, we're trying to run out cards pretty fast because we have to for the heroic part of the deck. And Quickblader is a good card that we can just play for cheap, be able to get in for 1 damage. And if our opponent doesn't answer it, it's just going to keep chipping away. Otherwise, if they do spend removal on it, it means our more valuable cards are still going to be a little safer. And this deck, from what Simu said, does win like pretty close games where you're sort of starting to be on your last leg of cards while your opponent's at like 1/2 defense, and drawing a Quickblader can still be pretty good for closing it out. Servant of Usurpation is a 1-cost 1/2. Fanfare, each opponent puts the top card of their deck into their cemetery, and during your turn, whenever a card is put from an opponent's deck into the cemetery, give this follower +1 attack. So his own effect is going to make him a 2/2 when he comes in, so this is another goblin stat line. This and Ironwrought Defender are pretty much our 2 best turn 1 plays, so we can start getting in for 2 damage immediately on turn 2. However, Servant of Usurpation, unlike Ironwrought Defender, is going to scale even higher as the game goes on and you play more of your Usurpation cards. So all 5 of the Usurpation cards that we play in this deck have effects to put your opponent's cards into Cemetery, which will all power up Servant of Usurpation. This actually means that while our early game is intended to be the heroic package, opening a Servant into any of the other Usurpation cards can also be a very strong aggro curve. And pretty much just opening like a 1, 2, 3 of Usurpation cards can be super threatening on its own. Moving into our 2-drops, we have Amaro Spear Knight. This is a 2-cost 2/2 strike. If you have another heroic follower on your field, give this +1/+1. That's pretty much going to come up if you play it on 2 and then also play another heroic card on 3, because his Evo is quite expensive. You're unlikely to be rushing in with him early. He costs 3 to evolve. He evolves into a 3/3. With on evolve, select a heroic card in your cemetery and play it for 0 play points. We're generally going to be using this to play our more expensive heroic cards, Mock Knight and Heroic Entry. Mach Knight gets benefit from this, since if he was put onto the field from anywhere other than your hand, he gains Storm, meaning Amarow's on evolve will be able to bring him in from Cemetery, get you a Storm follower, and you get to attack in with 2 guys. Or Heroic Entry, which is basically just our other way to find Mach Knight. It's check top 4, put a 3 cost or lower Swordcraft follower onto field, and then if that follower is heroic, give it +1/+1. So if you hit the Mach Knight off of that, you'll actually get a 4/4. So MRA is basically just a way for us to build a board from 1 card. It's one of those cards that's pretty good to top deck in like the mid or late game where we're starting to run out of cards, and we've already used some of our Mach Knights and stuff. And then Amaro comes out and basically just rebuilds from what we had before. Octrice, the Omen of Usurpation, the new sort of face card of Sword. This card has a lot of text on it, and a lot of it is really good. So she's a 2-cost 2/2. She has 2 separate Evo abilities. She can either evolve for 2, or if your opponent has at least 10 cards in Cemetery, she can evolve for 0, which is part of what's going to make her a very good sort of mid to late game card, because we're going to get to do a lot of stuff in 1 turn by being able to evolve for 0. Fanfare, each opponent puts the top 2 cards of their deck into their Cemetery, which is going to sort of both power up all of our other Usurpation cards and fuel the opponent's Cemetery for her Evo cost or her on-evolve effects that we'll see in a second. And then the last line of text on her, you can activate an ability, pay 8, select a card in an opponent's Cemetery, and play it for 0. Probably not very likely that that's going to be coming up in a faster deck like this. I doubt you'll be getting to 8, but if you do get to 8 and for some reason already have an Octrice on board, you can just play whatever your opponent's best card is and hopefully end the game that way. It's really funny against Dimension Shift specifically because you can just keep playing their Dimension Shift every turn and take infinite turns. I don't think that's very likely to come up though. Octrice living to that point is not really a guarantee. Looking at her evolve, this is where things get really cool. On evolve, you can select a card in an opponent's Cemetery and put it into your EX area. And then as long as there are 10 cards in opponent's cemeteries, each card you play from EX area costs 2 less. So this means that if you say your opponent has 10 cards in cemetery and your turn 6, you can play Octrice for 2, evolve her for 0, and then take a 6 drop and play it using your other 4 play points. This basically lets you, I mean, A, it's card advantage. You're basically drawing a card. B, you're cheating play points, so you're getting more value than what you're spending. And you're getting card quality, because you're basically just able to pick the best card in your opponent's cemetery. Whether that's, you know, an Olivia or a Tin Soldier, you can play for 1 and then shoot your opponent with the counter it'll get from coming in from EX area. You can take, like, Odette against Fable Haven to buff your whole board. There's just lots of options here. Against the Lashena decks, you can take Lashena herself and then get the 2 amulets and play them for free, which just turns you into like this weird grindy deck that has aggressive cards. There's just a lot of really powerful things you can do with Octrice. There's not really any one target in particular you're looking for, because it's going to be very situational and very matchup dependent. But the important part is that you're always getting like the best card. And that makes Octrice an insane like top deck mid-late game, because you'll always be getting the best card from like a growing selection as the game goes on. So really powerful part of the strategy, and sort of why we want the Usurpation package as our way to close out the game. Our last 2-cost card is Usurping Spineblade. So this is the Usurpation spell. It's a 2-cost quick timing. Select an enemy follower on the field, deal it 3 damage, and then each opponent puts the top card of their deck into their cemetery. Then, if there are at least 10 cards in opponent's cemeteries, deal 2 more damage to the selected follower. So this is a pretty flexible removal spell. Early game, you're able to just play it as a 2-cost deal 3 to take out, you know, kind of annoying 2/3 followers, or even 3/3s, like Fashionista, Nelcha, and Demonium. And then once you get into the sort of mid-game and your opponent has 10 cards in Cemetery, you're able to use it to take out bigger threats like Apostle of Silence or Gilnelise, where you're going to be going quite play point positive against your opponent. 5 damage is enough to quite often take out like 4 drops, 5 drops, even some 6 drops for just 2 play points on your own. Moving into our 3 drops, we have Disciple of Usurpation. So this is a 3-cost 3/2 Storm. Strike, each opponent puts the top card of their deck into their cemetery. Then, if there are at least 10 cards in opponent's cemeteries, give this follower +2 attack. So this is our new replacement for like Novice Trooper. Downside is that 2 defense means it is weak to cards like Angelic Snipe. It's a lot easier to remove before it can get its damage in. However, when it swings in, it is able to attack for a lot more. You can just play it for 3, swing, and hit for 5 if your opponent already has 9 in cemetery, since you'll put them to 10 with the strike effect. And if it's not answered on that turn, that'll keep growing every turn, since it's strike instead of fanfare. So you'll swing for 5 the first turn, you'll swing for 7 the next turn, you'll swing for 9 after that, and if your opponent hasn't answered it, I mean, they're probably just dead by that point. Next, we have Gemstaff Commander, sort of always here in these sword decks since it lets us search. What you're searching for is really just going to be situational based on where you're at in the game. Ideally, you're able to hold this card as long as possible without playing it so that you can use it at the end game to just grab whatever you need to close out. If you're looking for, grindy, longer game cards, you're grabbing Octrice here. Since you can actually probably play Gemstaff into Octrice and something from your opponent's cemetery in the same turn and get a lot of value that way. Earlier game, if you're playing it, you might be searching like Valiant Fencer or maybe even Disciple of Usurpation or Amaro. Just something to like curve out. There are even times where if you already have some of your late game cards, so you have like another good 3-drop to play on the next turn, you might just search a 1-drop so that you can play say Gemstaff Commander into Servant of Usurpation plus Disciple of Usurpation on 4, and just start powering up your board and threatening a lot of damage on your opponent. So a very flexible card, just something you want to sort of hold until you know exactly what you want. Our next 3-drop is Mock Knight, sort of the most powerful card of the heroic package. Not really the cover card, but this is definitely the one that's going to be killing you the most often. 3-cost 3/3. Fanfare, if this was put onto the field from anywhere other than your hand, give it Storm. That is going to be happening from either Amaro's on Evolve Effect, playing it from a cemetery, or Heroic Entry, playing it from deck. So those are our only 2 ways to get it in with Storm, but it's kind of what the deck is built to do, just kind of like either cheesing him into play with Heroic Entry, or once you get 1 out, Amaro is going to guarantee to bring it back over and over again and just keep giving it Storm to beat your opponent down. It also evolves for 1 into a 4/4. On evolve, select an enemy follower on the field and deal it 2 damage. If there are at least 2 heroic cards in your cemetery, deal 4 damage instead. So if you're using Heroic Entry to bring this out, that is already going to be 1 heroic card in your cemetery. And if you're able to play any kind of like heroic curve beforehand, you'll be able to meet this 4 damage off of 2 in cemetery pretty easily. Ideally, you're just hitting like Iron Rot Defender on 1 into Heroic Entry on 3, and your conditions met. 4 damage is really good here. It makes Mock Knight like actively good removal in addition to being a Storm threat, since you're able to take out pretty powerful cards like Tin Soldier, Dragon Warrior, any of the other 3-cost evos that go to 4/4s. So he's pretty good at like keeping the board clear and pressuring your opponent at the same time. Our last 3-cost follower is the face card of the heroic deck, Valiant Fencer. 3-cost 2/2. Fanfare, search your deck for a heroic card with a different name from this card, reveal it, and add it to your hand. You have a lot of options, obviously, to search for here. Usually, if you're just trying to curve out and have to play Valiant Fencer on 3, you'll be looking for Heroic Entry as a powerful play on the next turn to try to get either a Mock Knight into play or just any other 3-drop. Or if you are in the late game, sort of using it as a power play, you'll be searching Amaro to put Amaro into play in order to make use of the on evolve effect. Valiant Fencer himself evolves for 1 play point. However, you can only activate it if there are 2 or less cards in your hand. So this is part of the reason we're playing so many 1-drops and 2-drops. We're really trying to get down to this 2 or less cards in hand as fast as possible in order to evolve Valiant Fencer and get as much value as we can. Ideally, if you're doing this, you're going to have 2 cards in hand with the Valiant Fencer, play it down to 1, search back up to 2, and then be able to evo it from there, or have 3 cards in hand, play Valiant Fencer, search Amaro to go back up to 3, and then when you play the Amaro, you'll be back at 2, can evolve that way. And if those 2 cards in hand are like late game cards to close out, you're pretty much set. The on-evolve effect is just select a heroic follower with an evolve ability on your field and evolve it. So you can evolve another Valiant Fencer or a Mock Knight, but generally you're going to be choosing Amaro here, and this is why you would want to search Amaro. Amaro's own evolve effect costs 3, which is a lot, but if we're able to just pay 1 for Valiant Fencer's evo, we can evolve the Amaro for 0, and then be able to get back a Mock Knight that way, or a heroic entry if we don't have a Mock Knight yet, and just basically build a board from nothing, which gives us sort of a lot of freedom to just slam cards early. Doesn't really matter if our opponent removes them, as long as we're chipping away at our opponent's life and eating their removal spells. And then once our board's been cleared, we can play Valiant Fencer and rebuild it all for free. The last 3-drop we have is, of course, the heroic entry. Look at top 4 of deck, put a Swordcraft follower that costs 3 or less from among them onto your field. If it's heroic, give it +1/+1. Put the remaining cards on the bottom of your deck in any order. So getting any of our 3-drops is honestly pretty fine with this. Obviously, Mock Knight is the one that we want the most, since he'll come in as a 4/4 Storm. But getting Disciple of Usurpation can also be decent Storm pressure. Gemstaff Commander can just let us search whatever we want to play on the next turn. And same with Valiant Fencer, generally. He's probably the card that you don't want to see, but if you hit him, you can just search another heroic entry and then go again next turn, which is fine. So, not really any bad hits as long as you can find 3-drops. If you're having to hit 2-drops off of this, it starts to get less good just because you're going play point negative and not really getting good aggressive value. But hitting like an Octrice can still be fine. For our 4-drop, we have Apostle of Usurpation. This is the last Usurpation card we're playing. He's a 4-cost 3/4. Fanfare, each opponent puts the top 2 cards of their deck into the cemetery. Then, if there are at least 10 cards in opponent's cemeteries, draw a card. So this is a pretty decent card to have once we've sort of already run out our hand for Valiant Fencer and rebuilt our board. This is kind of just what we'll be following up with it, to slowly rebuild. Just keep drawing more cards to top deck, whatever the last few points of damage we need to close out the game are. Either looking for, more storm damage, or Octrice, or Majerabane, just anything like that we can draw off the top. He also evolves for 1 into a 4/5, with on evolve, select an enemy follower and deal it 4 damage. Again, 4 is a pretty good number for taking out some of the threatening cards like Tin Soldier, Dragon Warrior, all the 4/4s. There's a handful of others, so 4 is just a really nice number to be having. It's, why so many decks are playing Surefire Bullet. And the last card we have is Majerabane, Omen of 1. There's only 1 copy in this list. Since Apostle of Usurpation only has 1 Evo in the deck, this is probably like the one change I would make just to card counts, is cutting the 3rd Apostle of Usurpation for a 2nd Majerabane. He's not Swordcraft, so you can't search him off of any of your effects. So I would kind of like to have the 2nd copy here just to make him a little more consistent to draw for when you need him. He's a 5-cost 5/5 with Rush. At the start of your end phase, if there are 2 cards or less in your hand, deal 3 damage to each enemy leader, and then if there is 0 in hand, deal 3 to each enemy follower as well. He evolves for 1 into a 6/6. At the start of your end phase, refresh this card so you can swing him in to remove something and then keep him untapped. Alternatively, if he already has Storm, or if you've already passed a turn cycle with him, you can swing to at your opponent's face and then refresh him to keep him safe. If there are 2 or less cards in hand, deal 5 damage to each enemy leader instead of 3, and if 0, deal 5 to their followers as well. So this is a great card just to sort of close out the game once you've already completely exhausted your resources. run out all of your hand for Valiant Fencer turns. This is the next card that you want to see. Since you're already going to be low on hand, his effects are just always going to be active. Ideally, you can play him at a point where you can board wipe your opponent as well as burning their face, or you're just playing him while your opponent only has 5 or less defense and you're just killing them outright with his effect. But I would like to see the second copy in the deck just because he is basically the best late game top deck. And at only 1 copy, I don't know if you're going to top deck him quite enough. So looking at the deck as a whole, it's, you know, pretty straightforward, like aggro deck. You just have some better sort of like mid-game and late-game options. And it's fairly linear in terms of just wanting to curve out, jam as many cards as possible. Your mulligan's pretty easy. It's just you want the aggro cards in your hand, and you want the late-game cards in your deck so you can draw them later. And you're going to be shuffling enough between Valiant Fencer and Gemstaff Commander that mulliganing good cards to the bottom of your deck isn't an issue. You'll shuffle them back in and have a chance to draw them regardless. Some of the pros of the deck are that you have 2 powerful packages. Both of these 5-card packages are really strong on their own, and they cover both the early and late game. So they're kind of giving you just all around a solid deck. You have pretty decent removal built into your followers between Mock Knight and Apostle of Usurpation, both being able to deal 4 to things. And then you obviously have Usurping Spineblade as well, that's able to take out 5 defense followers. So while we are like an aggro go face deck, we can keep our opponent's board reasonably clear at the same time. And we have multiple good top deck cards to close out the game. Drawing Amaro to bring back a Storm Mock Knight, or drawing Valiant Fencer to get a big board set up out of nothing, or just getting Apostle of Usurpation to draw cards, or Majorabane to burn our opponent and kill them. Or even Octrice, right? Drawing Octrice late game to just steal our opponent's best card. So it kind of doesn't punish us that much for running out our hand early, since we have so many different options that we can just rip off the top and get back into the game. Cons, however, drawing cards from opposite packages early can lead to sort of awkward curves where your cards don't really have synergy with each other. Something like a Servant of Usurpation on 1, and then like Amaro on 2, you're not pumping it, you're not really benefiting from the Amaro. And then if you have to go into like Gemstaff on 3, it just kind of gets awkward where none of your cards interact with each other. There's also some awkward situations where having to play Gemstaff or Apostle of Usurpation on curve can keep like drawing you too many cards to where you can't use Valiant Fencer effectively. Especially if you draw multiple 3-drops, since it's hard to run those out in the same turn. So your curves can be a little awkward if you aren't able to mulligan into a good hand of just like 1s and 2s to jam on the board. And we have very few defensive options outside of removal. So Iron Rot Defender is our only ward, and we have no like healing in this deck. The only way we're going to get anything like that is if Octrice is able to steal it from our opponent. And it can make cards like Sybil or Olivia pretty good to steal, just to be able to get some like life gain on bodies that can swing for reasonable amounts. But it means we're going to be pretty weak to decks like Forest, where they're able to play like a good tempo game where they're answering our board efficiently, but also putting threats down that we're going to have to take time answering, or they're just going to sort of out-damage us. Here's the deck as a whole again. Pretty simple. It's 13 3-ofs and a 1-of. Like I said, I'd probably cut the Apostle of Usurpation for a second Majorabane, just to sort of give you more better top deck options in the late game. You can check out the deck log page once again using the code in the bottom right or the link in the description. And here is our Evo deck. And that's about it for this one. Thanks for watching. Thanks to Simu for sending the list. It's, again, probably not my first go-to for how I'd play the Usurpation package, but it works really well for him. It does sort of make use of a lot of the popular cards that we've already seen in Sword with the Heroic package, sort of spicing that deck up. It's probably the way you'd want to go if you were a fan of the aggro strategy from the last few sets. But yeah, so pretty cool deck overall. Again, thank you for watching. We'll have the last Omen Ryo, the 9th Omen, coming out here soon. Until then, there should be some videos on the screen that you can watch, and we'll see you next time.